question is, how many kings in the Bible did not believe in God? The Bible does not usually describe kings as not believing in God the way we might say it today. Most kings in Scripture believed in some God or gods. The biblical issue is usually whether they served the Lord, obeyed him, and rejected idols. This may sound like an idle question, but it is a good one nonetheless. So why don't we take a look and see what we are able to uncover? So our best biblical answer looks like this. Among the kings of Israel and Judah, about 30 kings are described as wicked or unfaithful to God. That breaks down this way: the kingdom, number of kings, and faithfulness pattern. The northern kingdom of Israel had 19 kings, and all 19 did evil and followed idolatry. The southern kingdom of Judah had 20 kings, and about 11 did evil, while about 8 are usually counted as good or reforming kings. So our grand tally turns out to be a total of 30 wicked, unfaithful kings. Depending on whether Athaliah is counted, some say that there were 31 rulers. As we think on this, there is an important distinction to keep in mind. These kings were not necessarily atheists. Many of them knew about the Lord, but they rejected him in practice by worshiping idols, promoting false worship, shedding innocent blood, or leading the people away from God. For example, Ahab worshiped Baal and provoked the Lord greatly. Manasseh filled Jerusalem with idolatry and innocent blood. Jeroboam the first created false worship centers and led Israel into sin. Ahaz and others trusted foreign gods and pagan practices. So for a simple teaching answer, we could say, if we are speaking of the kings of Israel and Judah, about 30 kings were unbelieving or unfaithful in the sense that they rejected the Lord's ways and led the people into sin. But the Bible's language is usually not, they did not believe in God. It says they did evil in the sight of the Lord. The cleanest count is 19 wicked kings of Israel plus 11 wicked kings of Judah equals 30. But our research doesn't stop there. Let's venture outside of the northern and southern kingdoms and take a look at 5 more kings. I mention these because there is a point to be taken from all of this, if you will allow me. The next question is, how many biblical kings did not serve the Lord, but did things to help his people? Well, for you Bible scholars, the first one to come to mind may be King Cyrus. And you would not be wrong. However, there are at least 5 clear biblical kings who did not appear to serve the Lord as covenant believers, but still helped God's people in major ways. There is King Hiram of Tyre, who helped David and Solomon with cedar, craftsmen, and materials connected to the kingdom and temple. Then there is King Cyrus of Persia, who released the Jews from captivity and commanded the rebuilding of the temple. Then we have King Darius of Persia, who confirmed King Cyrus's decree and financed and protected the rebuilding of the temple. We also have King Artaxerxes of Persia, who supported Ezra and Nehemiah, gave authority, supplies, and permission to rebuild Jerusalem. And there is also King Ahasuerus, or King Xerxes of Persia, who, through Queen Esther and her uncle Mordecai, allowed the Jews to defend themselves from destruction. If we were to include more complex or partial examples, this number would increase to about 8 or 9 kings. Follow me here. It may feel like we are veering off of the beaten path, but we are actually on solid footing with today's lesson. To introduce some more possible examples, let's look no further than Pharaoh in Joseph's day. He elevated Joseph and allowed Jacob's family to survive the famine in Egypt. We all know that Jacob became Israel, and Joseph preserved Jacob's family. Then we have King Nebuchadnezzar. This king destroyed Jerusalem, so this makes him a bit complicated. But he also promoted Daniel and later honored the God of heaven after being humbled. Next, we have King Jehu. This king did not fully follow the Lord, but he destroyed Baal worship in Israel. Then there was King Jeroboam II. He did evil, but God used his reign to restore Israel's borders and give relief to the nation. All in all, there are at least 3 foreign kings who clearly helped God's people without being true servants of the Lord.
Jehu and Jeroboam were Israelite kings. If we include partial or complicated cases like Pharaoh, Nebuchadnezzar, Jehu, and Jeroboam II, the number is closer to 8 or 9. But even more importantly, here is the lesson. God can use people who do not know him to still accomplish his will for his people. King Cyrus stands out as one of the clearest proofs to this claim. So let's shift gears here. Fast forward to today. We are coming upon an election season that is being watched and contested from all angles in this country. There are those who are happy with certain candidates and unhappy with others. Judgments fly, accusations are made, and politics take on a countenance of bitterness that can split friends and families apart without bias. The political landscape tends to take a nasty turn that no longer focuses on the issues of the country and the needs of its people. And once that happens, we have to be very careful, especially those of us who claim to speak for God. Because the moment our politics becomes louder than our prayer life, we are already in dangerous territory. The moment party loyalty becomes stronger than biblical honesty, we are already drifting. The moment we start using words like false prophet, antichrist, demon, or enemy of God simply because someone stands on the other side of a political aisle, we have moved from discernment into accusation. Now, let me be clear. I am not standing here to tell anybody who to vote for. I am not standing here to crown candidate James Tallarico as righteous, nor am I standing here to defend every word he has ever spoken. That is not my assignment. My concern is bigger than one candidate. My concern is the spirit by which we judge, the speed by which we condemn, and the carelessness with which we attach God's name to our political anger. Because false prophet is not a casual insult. That is biblical language. That is weighty language. That is language that belongs in the hands of sober, prayerful, scripture-grounded discernment, not in the mouth of political frustration. A false prophet is not simply someone who disagrees with your preferred party. A false prophet is not simply someone who interprets a passage differently than you. A false prophet is not simply someone whose policies trouble you, offend you, or challenge your tradition. If a man twists scripture, then test the twisting. If a man teaches error, then answer the error with scripture. If a man supports policies you believe are wrong, then challenge those policies with truth, wisdom, and moral clarity. But do not take a holy title of judgment and throw it like a stone before you have done the work of righteous examination. The Bible tells us to test the spirits. It does not tell us to follow rumors. It tells us to judge righteous judgment. It does not tell us to judge by appearance. It tells us that by their fruits we shall know them. It does not tell us that by their party label we shall know them. And this is where the kings of Scripture become important to the conversation. Because if God could use Cyrus, who did not serve the Lord as a covenant believer, to help rebuild the temple, then we must be careful about saying who God can and cannot use. If God could use Pharaoh in Joseph's day to preserve Jacob's family during famine, then we must be careful about assuming that usefulness to God always looks like membership in our religious camp. If God could humble Nebuchadnezzar and cause a pagan king to acknowledge the God of heaven, then we must be careful about writing people off before God is finished dealing with them. That does not mean every king was righteous. That does not mean every ruler was approved. That does not mean every political leader is anointed, holy, trustworthy, or safe. Ahab was still wicked. Manasseh was still guilty. Jeroboam still led Israel into sin. The Bible does not ask us to be naive, but neither does it give us permission to be reckless. The lesson is not trust every politician. The lesson is not ignore doctrine. The lesson is not pretend every person who quotes scripture is speaking for God. The lesson is this: God is sovereign enough to use people we do not understand, people we do not agree with, and even people who do not fully know him, while still holding every person accountable for truth, justice, mercy, and righteousness.
So when we come to a candidate like James Tallarico, or any candidate for that matter, the Christian response should not begin with panic, slander, or spiritual name calling. It should begin with examination. What did he actually say? What did he actually mean? What scripture did he use? Did he handle it faithfully? What fruit is being produced? What policies are being advanced? What spirit is being displayed? What is true? What is false? and what still requires careful discernment. We can disagree without bearing false witness. We can challenge without hatred. We can rebuke without becoming unrighteous ourselves. We can test a man's words without pretending we can see the final condition of his soul. And maybe that is the part we have forgotten. The church is not called to be a campaign machine. The church is called to be the pillar and ground of the truth. We are not called to baptize our favorite party and demonize everyone else. We are called to speak truth, love mercy, walk humbly, pray for those in authority, and remember that the kingdoms of this world are still under the authority of the King of Kings. So before we call a man a false prophet, let us make sure we are not being false witnesses. Before we condemn someone as an enemy of God, let us make sure our own hearts are not being ruled by anger, fear, or political loyalty. Before we throw stones in the name of righteousness, let us make sure we have not traded discernment for division. Because God has always been bigger than our political boxes. He used kings who did not know him. He corrected kings who claimed to know him. He raised up rulers. He brought rulers down. He protected his people through unlikely vessels. And he never once needed permission from a political party to accomplish his will. So my challenge is simple. Test every voice, including mine. Test every candidate. Test every preacher. Test every claim. Test every accusation. But do it with scripture, not suspicion. Do it with truth, not tribalism. Do it with humility, not hatred. Because at the end of the day, the question is not just whether a candidate is right or wrong. The question is whether we, the people who claim to belong to God, are still willing to be righteous in how we judge.